Forget the neon signs for a minute. Forget the crowds of tourists and those hour-long lines for hot chicken. I want you to remember Nashville before, back when it was still a small southern city, a place where music drifted effortlessly from front porches, where your neighbors actually knew your name, and life moved to the slow, steady rhythm of a worn-out guitar. If you were here in the 70s, you remember those warm summer evenings, the magnolias swaying in the breeze, the cicadas buzzing, and a country song spilling soft from a neighbor's radio. Maybe it was Dolly, maybe it was Merle. Either way, it just sounded like home. We stood at a crossroads back then, caught between tradition and change. We held tight to our roots. Slow-paced days, sweet tea on the porch, church on Sunday. But the ground was shifting. You could feel a new energy rising. Opryland USA had just opened its gates. The interstates were stretching their arms across the city, and Music City was becoming more than a nickname. It was becoming an engine for dreams. Inside the house, families gathered around the TV, some black and white, some finally seeing color. Kids ran barefoot outside until the streetlights buzzed on. You still heard plenty of "yes, sir" and "no, ma'am." And if you moved in down the block, someone showed up with a peach cobbler to welcome you home. But the outside world was knocking too. Dinner table talk started changing. It was Vietnam, rising gas prices, and civil rights. Nashville wasn't just a quiet town anymore. We were becoming a mirror of America, hopeful, divided, proud, and a little uncertain. And yet, in the middle of all that change, the soul of Nashville stayed true, built on music, on kindness, and a deep sense of place. So if you're ready, let's go back for a while. Not just in memory, but in spirit. Back to slow dances in the kitchen, Sunday drives down quiet roads, and the sound of a steel guitar echoing through a warm Tennessee night. You couldn't talk about Nashville in the 70s without painting a picture of its look, its sound, and its soul. It wasn't flashy back then, but it was real. And the symbols of that time told you everything you needed to know about who we were. At the heart of it all, the music, not the polished crossover sound you hear today. I'm talking about raw, heartfelt storytelling. Radios crackled with the voices of Johnny Cash, Loretta Lynn, Conway Twitty, and Tammy Wynette. On any given night, a live band would be playing at some dusty honky-tonk on Broadway, neon signs flickering, and a dance floor that never stood still. And you can't forget one of the biggest icons of the decade, Opryland USA. When those gates opened in 1972, families flocked there. For the country shows, the roller coasters, the riverboat rides. It was part amusement park, part cultural shrine. For a lot of folks here, that's where childhood memories were made. Then there was the fashion, casual, southern, and full of character. See, cowboy boots, denim jackets, and wide-brimmed hats weren't a costume. They were just what people wore, practical, but with a little flair. Bell-bottom jeans, flannel shirts, flowy dresses in warm earth tones. You dressed up for church on Sunday, sure, but most of the time, you just wore what felt right. You'd see pickup trucks parked outside the local diners. You'd see folks gathered on porches, iced tea in hand, with the dial tuned to WSM. Those AM/FM radios weren't just background noise. They were lifelines to the outside world, the heartbeat of the town. And Broadway? Well, it looked nothing like that crowded tourist strip is today. In the 70s, it was still rough around the edges. Local, gritty, authentic, a little wild maybe, but it was ours. These weren't just images. They were the language of everyday life. They were what made Nashville feel like Nashville. But to really understand how deeply these symbols were woven into the city, you had to see what was happening behind the scenes, how the social, economic, and political backdrop of the time was shaping everything around us. Beneath the melodies and the magnolias, though, Nashville in the 70s was wrestling with some big questions. Many of them were the same ones echoing across the whole country. See, the decade wasn't just about twangy guitars and fried chicken. It was about figuring out who exactly we were becoming. Economically, we were growing, but I wouldn't say booming. Music was the engine, pulling in artists, producers, and dreamers from everywhere. Music Row was buzzing with recording studios, small labels, and hopeful voices just trying to catch a break. But we also had the universities anchoring us. Vanderbilt, Fisk, Tennessee State, bringing instability and a steady stream of young minds. Jobs were decent if you knew where to look. A lot of folks worked in education, healthcare, or for the state government. And compared to places like New York or Chicago, living here was affordable. You could raise a family, buy a modest home, and get by on a single income, though you could feel that starting to slip away. Politically, well, the city still carried the weight of its Southern history. The laws had changed, sure, but in practice, segregation still lingered in our schools, our neighborhoods, and in people's hearts. Buzzing was the hot topic, stirring up real controversy. Families, black and white, were grappling with what that change really looked like up close. And while some folks held on tight to the past, others were pushing forward. Activists, students, local leaders. They were quietly laying the groundwork for a more inclusive future. Nashville wasn't the Deep South stereotype anymore. But we weren't fully progressive either. We sat somewhere in between, just trying to find our footing. On the national stage, the Vietnam War cast a long shadow. Some boys from Nashville got drafted. Others were out protesting. Dinner tables weren't always peaceful back then. Throw in rising gas prices, inflation, and there was this general sense that the world was shifting faster than we could keep up. Still, most folks carried on with a quiet resilience. We worked hard, kept the faith, and held close to family and church. We turned to the music, not just for fun, but for comfort. Because if you listened closely, those country songs weren't just entertainment. They were reflections of everything we were feeling. And those feelings didn't just stay in the headlines, you know. They shaped how we lived every single day, starting right at home. Step inside a Nashville home in the 70s, and you'd likely catch the smell of dinner simmering on the stove, hear the low, steady hum of a box fan, and feel that thick shag carpet under your feet. Life wasn't fancy back then, but it sure was full. Most families lived in modest one-story houses, usually brick with wide front yards. You know the kind, where the mailbox leaned just a little to the side, and kids left their bikes sprawled out right on the lawn. Backyards were for cookouts, swing sets, and hanging the laundry out on sunny days. And air conditioning? That wasn't a given, especially in the older neighborhoods. A lot of us relied on ceiling fans, open windows, and pitchers of iced tea just to get through those humid Tennessee summers. And yet, people made it work. You'd sit out on the porch in the evening, talk with the neighbors, and let the breeze do its best. Inside, the house was the heart of it all. The kitchen table wasn't just for eating. It was where homework got done, bills were paid, and birthday candles were blown out. Living rooms had those big console TVs, wood-paneled walls, and maybe a velvet Elvis painting or two. It seemed like everything was colored avocado green or harvest gold back then. We gathered to watch shows like The Waltons, Hee Haw, or The Carol Burnett Show, sometimes with TV dinners on those little folding trays. But more often than not, dinner was home-cooked. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans straight from the garden. Eating out, well, that was strictly for special occasions. Us kids? We played outside until dark, riding banana seat bikes, catching fireflies, playing tag in the empty lots. Parents didn't hover over you like they do now. As long as you were home by sundown, all was well. Boundaries were loose, but the community was strong. Folks looked out for each other. Life moved slower, but it never felt dull. There was a rhythm to it, seasonal, grounded, and full of small joys. Church on Sundays, yard sales on Saturdays, and front porch conversations on weeknights. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real. And for many of us who grew up in it, that kind of life still feels like home. Did you grow up in Nashville during the 70s? I'd love to hear your story. Share your favorite memory from home life in the comments below. Because sometimes the smallest moments are the ones we never forget. Back in the 70s Nashville, a car wasn't just a way to get from point A to B. It was a symbol of freedom. It was status. It was your Saturday night plans. The streets were wide, traffic was light. And that deep rumble of a V8 engine? That meant someone was heading somewhere worth going. You saw those big American sedans everywhere, Chevys, Fords, Oldsmobiles. Long, low boats with chrome bumpers that could actually survive a fender bender. Gas was cheap enough too, at least until the oil crisis hit in '73. Then suddenly, those long lines at the pump became a part of life. Made folks start rethinking just how far they really needed to drive. Families would pile into the station wagon for weekend trips. Kids lying in the very back, no seatbelts of course, just watching the trees fly by through the rear window. And the teenagers? They were cruising down Broadway or circling the local hangouts. Music blaring from an 8-track player, windows down, arm-draped casual out the side. For most folks, owning a car wasn't really a choice. It was a necessity. Sure, public transportation existed, but the buses ran on a fixed schedule, and few people relied on them unless they had to. Walking and biking worked in the tight-knit neighborhoods, but once you moved out to those growing suburbs, the car was king. The interstates, I-40 and I-65, were stretching out, connecting Nashville to the rest of the South and making it easier than ever to move around. But those new highways cut right through neighborhoods, changing the shape of the city forever. It brought growth, sure, but it divided communities too. Parking downtown wasn't the headache it is today. You could find a spot right near the Ryman or your favorite diner without circling for half an hour. And when it snowed, which didn't happen often, everything just ground to a halt. Seems like Nashville never did figure out how to handle winter roads. The way we moved told you a lot about how we lived. Unhurried, independent, and just a little rebellious. Whether it was a Sunday drive through the rolling hills or a late-night ride with the radio turned all the way up, the road always held a bit of magic. And if you followed those roads far enough, they'd take you somewhere truly special. Straight into the heart of Nashville's most powerful export, its sound. If Nashville had a heartbeat in the 70s, it beat in 4/4 time. Steady, heartfelt, and unmistakably country. Now, traditional country still ruled the airwaves back then, but something new was stirring. You had artists like Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers blending that sound with pop, bringing Nashville into living rooms all across America. But the roots, they ran deep. The Grand Ole Opry was still sacred ground. Those Saturday night broadcasts were a ritual, gathering round the radio or the TV, letting the week just fade away to the sound of fiddles and steel guitars. Johnny Cash, Loretta Lynn, Merle Haggard. Their songs weren't just music, they were mirrors. They reflected who we were, what we felt, and the struggles we didn't always know how to say out loud. And on the street, the fashion followed function, but always with character. You saw men in flared jeans, snap-button shirts, and boots that looked better when they were scuffed. Women wore long skirts, feathered hair, fringe jackets that seemed to dance when they moved. Even if you didn't have a dime, you had style. While music poured out of car stereos and jukeboxes, the television was becoming the new family hearth. We all tuned in to The Waltons, All in the Family, Hee Haw, The Mary Tyler Moore Show. The sets were big and bulky, the picture sometimes a little fuzzy, but the stories, they felt close. They were funny, messy, hopeful, just like real life. Color TVS were finally taking over the black and white ones. But it didn't matter what you were watching on. You didn't scroll, you didn't skip, you sat down and you watched together. And if the TV was off, you can bet the radio was on. WSMAM was the heartbeat of this city. That signal stretched for hundreds of miles, carrying Nashville's soul way out beyond the Cumberland River. Late at night, truckers and dreamers from all over would tune in, listening to a city that somehow just felt like home. See, Nashville wasn't just where country music was made. It was where culture lived. In the clothes, in the voices, and in the soft glow of a living room screen. Did this part bring back a specific song for you? Or maybe a show you used to watch with your folks? Drop it in the comments. Let's build a playlist of memories together. Before the skyline got crowded with all those glass towers and tourist traps, Nashville's identity lived in its landmarks. These were places that carried our stories, our pride, and the quiet rhythm of everyday life. Right at the center of it all stood the Ryman Auditorium. By the 70s, we already knew it as the mother church of country music. Even though the Grand Ole Opry packed up and moved to a new venue in 1974, the Ryman, it held on to the echoes of standing ovations, gospel harmonies, and legends, whose voices seemed to bounce off those wooden pews like a sacred memory. That new venue? The Grand Ole Opry House, out at Opryland. It was sleek, spacious, built for the big time. Now, some longtime fans missed the intimacy of the Ryman. Others embraced the change, but either way, it marked a new era. Nashville was growing up. Then there was Opryland USA. That park opened in '72, tucked right along the banks of the Cumberland, with the roller coasters, the live shows, the paddleboat rides. It wasn't just fun, it was a celebration of Southern culture, school field trips, family Saturdays. If you were a kid here back then, Opryland was your own personal magic kingdom. Another icon was quieter. The Cumberland River itself. It wound through the city like a slow-moving soundtrack, passing the boat docks, the factories, and neighborhoods that watched generations come and go. You might not think of a river as a landmark, but ask anyone who's lived here long enough. They'll tell you those waters hold a lot of memories. And of course, there was Music Row. It wasn't flashy. Just a stretch of modest buildings and old houses turned into studios. But behind those plain doors, pure magic. That's where the hits were written, demos recorded, and careers launched. If you drove past too fast, you'd miss it. But if you stopped to listen, you'd hear history being made. These weren't just tourist attractions. They were anchors. They gave this city its shape, its soundtrack, and its soul. And like any place with a real soul, the way to truly know it is through something much simpler, much closer to home. The food. In '70s Nashville, food wasn't about trends. It was about tradition. You could tell where someone was raised just by the way they made their cornbread. And you knew you were finally home by the smell of dinner drifting right through the screen door. Southern cooking ruled the table. I'm talking crispy fried chicken, mashed potatoes swimming in gravy, collard greens with a hint of vinegar, and homemade biscuits so soft they barely held together. Butter wasn't measured back then. It was trusted. And everything, I mean everything, tasted better coming out of a cast iron skillet. Most nights, we ate at home. Dinner was sacred, even on weekdays. Families gathered round the table, not the television set. "We passed the dishes," said Grace, and actually caught up on the day. Eating out? That was a treat, not a routine. Now, when folks did go out, it was usually to the local diners or BBQ joints, tucked away in unassuming corners. You'd get those meat and 3 plates piled high, sweet tea by the gallon, and maybe some banana pudding if you had the room. Sure, fast food chains like McDonald's and Burger King were starting to pop up, but they hadn't replaced the mom and pop spots just yet. And hot chicken? Well, forget the fancy version you see today with the pickles arranged just so. I'm talking about the real deal. Places like Prince's serving it the way they always had, fiery, greasy, and addictive. Back then, it wasn't a tourist attraction. It was just a well-kept local secret. Grocery shopping was a weekly ritual too. You'd head down to Kroger or the neighborhood market, clip your coupons, and you knew your cashier by name. Kids sat in the cart begging for Fruit Loops while parents stuck to the list. More or less. Portions were generous. Recipes were handwritten. And every dish had a story. Food wasn't just nourishment to us. It was memory. It was identity. It was Sunday lunch after church, summer picnics, and casseroles delivered to a neighbor during the hard times. And no matter how tight money got, there was always enough to feed one more. Because in Nashville, sharing a meal meant sharing your life. What dish instantly takes you back to your childhood table? Tag someone you used to share it with. Or just drop the name of your old go-to spot in the comments. Let's stir up some good memories. Now, looking back, nostalgia tends to soften the edges. But truth be told, Nashville in the 70s had its shadows too. For all the music and that neighborly charm, the city was going through some real growing pains. See, economic opportunities outside of music and education were limited. If you weren't a teacher, a nurse, or connected to the industry, decent jobs could be hard to come by, especially the kind that paid a living wage. And we can't ignore the racial divides. They didn't just disappear because the laws changed. They lingered in everyday life. Schools were under orders to desegregate, but our neighborhoods remained divided. Busing sparked protests. And while progress was real, it was slow. It was uneven. For many Black families, the promise of equal opportunity still felt a long way off. As new highways and suburbs pulled resources elsewhere, some parts of the city got left behind. You saw pockets of poverty deepening. Crime started ticking up. Maybe not dramatically, but enough to change how people moved around, enough to make you careful after dark. Young folks were facing a country in flux. Vietnam, Watergate, inflation. A lot of them started leaving, searching for something different. Some never looked back. Others stayed put, trying to keep the spirit of this place intact through all the noise. And even as the city stretched out, it hadn't quite caught up with itself. Sidewalks would just disappear in certain neighborhoods. Public transportation left a lot to be desired. The charm was real, sure, but so were the cracks. Still, in the middle of that tension, between tradition and change, hardship and hope, there was something deeply human, something that made this city more than just a pretty postcard. It was imperfect, just like the rest of America, but it kept showing up. Because for every hard day, we still had the music, we had family, we had faith, and we held on to the belief that tomorrow might just be a little better. If you had to sum up Nashville in the 70s in just one word, I think it'd be honest. This was a city still small enough that neighbors actually waved when you drove by. Still quiet enough for the music to float right through the open windows. And proud enough to hold on to its roots, even as the world outside started spinning a little faster. There was a gentleness to how we lived, sure, but there was a grit to how we endured too. Faith, family, and music. Those weren't just slogans, they were lifelines. Now, The decade didn't change everything overnight, but it planted the seeds. Seeds of inclusion, of ambition, of a change that didn't forget where it came from. You felt it in the way folks sat on their porches. We weren't looking down at screens or trying to escape reality. We were just there, being present. It was in the way a simple meal, a shared hymn, or a quiet Saturday drive could carry so much meaning. Nashville wasn't trying to be everything to everyone back then. It was content just being itself. And maybe that's why those of us who lived through it remember it so clearly. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Long before the bachelorette parties, before the high-rise hotels and the murals, there was a city that sang from the soul, a place where struggle and sweetness lived side by side, a place where the spirit of a decade could still echo in the whine of a steel guitar, the smell of cornbread in the oven, or that hush that falls right before a song begins. Nashville in the 70s wasn't just a time on a calendar, it was a feeling, and if you were there, you'll never forget how it felt. If this journey brought back even one memory for you, one sound or one image, please like, subscribe, and share this video, because memories like these, they deserve to be passed on. What do you remember most about the challenges of that time? Drop your story in the comments below, because even the hard parts deserve to be remembered.